morning. Welcome to the Center for Creativity. I see some new faces and some returning faces. We're so happy to have you here. My name is Anina Collier. I'm the Dean of the Center for Creativity. And if you're watching on the live stream, we're really happy to have you as well. And just while I'm thinking about it, speaking of the live stream, anybody who asks a question or contributes, I'm going to repeat into the mic so that the people on the live stream can hear. Before we get into our workshop, which is about telling a story, I'm going to make a quick announcement, and bear with me if you've been to our other workshops because you hear this every time. But has anyone not heard of the Tulsa Achieves Scholarship Program? Okay, a couple people. So what this is 2 years of free college for any student who graduates high school in Tulsa County. So that's public, private, or home school, and comes straight to TCC. You do not have to enroll full-time. You only are required to take 1 credit, but you can't take a gap year. You have to come in right after your senior year summer. You only have to have a 2.0 GPA. This is an incredible opportunity to get 2 years of free college that transfers easily to a 4-year school if that's the path that you want. Every time I announce this, I know that people are thinking, too good to be true, what's the catch? There is no catch. This is something that the city and business leaders and the college and individuals have come together to make possible, to have educated young people and a great workforce for Tulsa. So we have these in English and Spanish. They are back on the registration table. If you have a young person in your life, please make sure they know about this because it is incredible. It's a national model for free college. In fact, when President Obama was president, he held this up as a national model. So it's an incredible thing our community does. So please help us spread the word. So I think I said my name's Anina Collier, and typically this is the point in the I Can't workshops when I hand it over to our partner organization and our guest artist. Today, that is going to be me. So many of you may know me as a person here at the Center for Creativity, but in my other life, I work for an organization called the Moth, who, I know a few of you, I see some people who've taken our workshops. Who has heard of the Moth? And it's totally okay if you haven't. Okay, so about 50-50. So the Moth is an international storytelling organization. It's based in New York, and it is dedicated to the art and craft of sharing true personal stories. And we'll get into more about the Moth-style in a minute, but I do want to say I just feel like, especially at this time in our society, as things become more and more divided and we have more and more difficulty connecting with people, I think the necessity of storytelling just becomes so much more apparent. It's an incredible way to connect with individuals, to learn about people who might be very different from you through telling your personal stories. And I'm sure some of you seated in here today already have some great storytelling experience. I know some of you are active with OK So or have taken our Moth workshops before, and maybe you already have story ideas that you want to develop. And some of you are probably thinking, I'm here because I really can't tell a story. And just to let you know, I used to be one of those people. In fact, it was kind of a joke in our family between my husband and me. We have 2 children, and my kids are like, tell me a story, and I'd be like, well, let's see, when I was 5, my house got struck by lightning and it burned down. That sucked. Dad, you got anything? And so I really was one of those people that felt like I could not tell a story. And after working with the Moth through the Center for Creativity for many years, I now feel really empowered to tell stories. And so our goal today is we only have 45 minutes. So it will be the quickest version ever of an introduction to storytelling. When we do these workshops with the Moth, they're usually 15 hours long, spread out over the course of 2 weeks. So we're just giving a really quick overview, and then there will be an opportunity to kind of put your name in the hat for our spring workshop with the Moth, so we'll tell later. So today we're gonna talk about the Moth-style, which is a very specific type of storytelling. We're gonna hear an example story by a Moth storyteller. We're going to do story prompts. So if you don't have a story idea, you just really want to get started on something but don't know where to start, these are going to be like some brainstorming. If you already have a story idea, these can help you brainstorm additional ideas. We'll do a little story share, really mini because we don't have a lot of time. We'll do some tips and tricks, and then we'll talk about what's next. And I will say, I think I mentioned this earlier, but if you are at a table by yourself or just one or two people, later if you want to move up, because we'll be doing a table-based exercise. So what is a Moth-style story? The number one thing is it needs to be a true story. So this is a true story of something that happened to you personally. So of course I mentioned there's so many types, so many cultures, so many amazing storytelling traditions, but this is specific to you. So if your point of view is centered in this story. So there may be a great family story about the time mom went over Niagara Falls in a barrel. That would be her story to tell. It would not be a good example of a Moth-style story. So this would be about something that happened to you where your point of view is centered. Moth stories are told live and without notes. And the reason for that is we really want this to be a story, kind of like you're holding court at a dinner party or, telling some close friends, not that you're reciting like a script or something that you sat down and wrote through. And so that's why we tell them live without notes. And for the purpose of most storytelling opportunities, whether that's with the Moth or things going on here in Tulsa, these stories need to be no longer than 5 minutes. So if you're a fan of the Moth Radio Hour, which many of you may have heard on NPR or through whatever podcast app you use, lots of times you'll hear much longer versions, maybe even 15 or 20-minute stories. Those are stories that have been developed through the Moth for other outlets. So they have main stage events. We actually had one here in Tulsa a couple years ago where alumni of our Moth workshops got on a main stage and told a longer version of their story. Or it might be specifically developed for the story hour or something, but for things that go around here, they really need to be about 5 minutes long. And there's a few other really important things we'll get to, but these are the very basics of a Moth-style story. The Center for Creativity, so we became Oklahoma's exclusive community partner of the Moth in 2020, and in that time we have offered dozens of workshops to help Tulsans tell their stories, including a Deaf Voices workshop. You can see, you may know Dr. Glenna Cooper, she's there on the right. She was one of our faculty members who did a Deaf Voices workshop with the Moth, and that was the first time ever the Moth was able to offer that, and we were the right partner for them. It was a big honor. The man there with his hand like this, he is an alumni of our program who told a story on the Dallas main stage. That's us there at Canes. You may know that the Moth launched their pop-up porch tour from Tulsa a few years ago, a national tour, and that was because of our relationship with them. So we've been really honored to be their community partner and to help people in Tulsa tell stories and get on a national stage. And this, we like I mentioned, we do have a spring intensive coming up that we'll talk about in a minute. So, in addition, and I'm going to talk a little bit here in the beginning, but it'll get participatory, so just bear with me. So there are 3 big elements that make a Moth-style story special, and I would argue really kind of any story. The number one thing is that over the course of the story, it shows some sort of change or growth in the storyteller. And this is what differentiates a Moth-style story from just a really funny story you might tell at the bar or with your friends, or a sad story that you're using to, connect with someone. That change is so important, and it's also the thing that often people forget to incorporate. And a lot of times in workshops, if someone's, kind of trying to find that story and really sort of circling around it but hasn't hit it, if you're just like, what's the change? And they really have to think about it and identify it. It's just so important to get that change. Another thing is there has to be stakes involved. So there has to be some kind of compelling stakes that's moving the story forward, that's really helping your listener understand what you have at stake. And this doesn't mean that it needs to be a story with a lot of suspense or a story that has like some huge ramification. Some of the best stories are small moments. One of, I think, the stories that I've told that might have been one of my more successful ones was just about a time we got a flat tire. So on the surface, you know, not a big, huge subject. But you can really, once you get into this more, you can really take, you can start to identify these little moments that brought along change and that also do have stakes with them. And then the last one is understanding that in 5 minutes, in a 5-minute story, you have time to do usually about one big scene. And so in that scene, you're really going to slow time down, help get the listeners right there in the moment with you. So in that tire story I mentioned, my big scene was when my whole family is standing on the side of the road in the desert with the sun crashing down, and nobody is going to be able to help us. And so I really would spend time in that scene talking about what it felt like to be there, what I was thinking on the inside, what other people were saying. Contrast that with summary. So when you only have 5 minutes, you also have to really decide what you're going to summarize and what you're really going to drill down into with the scene. So a summary would be like, it took me 8 years and 2 husbands to become a mom. I just gave you 8 years of my life and gave you the stakes in one sentence, right? And we'll use my journey to become a mom as a little more of an example, but it was 8 years of my life. I could probably tell 100 different stories about those 8 years. But when you're especially if you're trying to tell a story that is a really big story that incorporates a long period of your life or has a lot of background info that you need people to know, figuring out what you're going to summarize is very, very helpful. There's another famous story by a storyteller named Alistair Bain when he says something like, I lost my job, I lost my partner, I lost my house, and now all I have is this dog. And I'm paraphrasing. But that gives you so much information about where he was at that moment, right? He could have told 100 stories about how he got to this point, but it gave us just enough information to be there in the moment with him, with his dog. Does that make sense? Scene versus summary? So these are 3 big things. Change. How did you grow or change? Stakes. Did you have something to gain or lose? And understanding what your scene is, your big scene. And sometimes, there might be too many scenes if you don't spend too long on one. But what is your big scene versus what are you summarizing for the listener? So this, you should have gotten a printout. This is an example of the way a Moth story can be formatted. And in just a minute, we're going to listen to a Moth story that doesn't exactly go by this map, but we're going to talk about the change and the scene and things like that to kind of help illustrate these points. So in general, you're going to give some sense of context, right? Like I lost my house, I lost my job, I lost my partner. Or I'd waited 25 years for this moment. Or, something like that. Some kind of, and the summary can be longer than just one sentence, don't get me wrong, but you want some kind of summary so that people understand where you are and how you're coming to this story. Then that little exclamation point, and then one day. There's some kind of an inciting incident or something that is causing the beginning of the situation, the change, the growth. And this story we're going to listen to in just a minute has a good example of that. And then the majority of your story is taking place as it's rising, this rising action. And often that's when you're describing what's at stake, what all the little things that really get people hanging on your story. And then there's often a moment of change. And if you start listening to Moth stories, or if you already do, there's a lot of, and that's when I realized, or in that moment, it became clear. So sometimes it's very specific what that moment of change is, and sometimes it's not so much. But you're getting to some sort of climax of your story, and often that climax is where your main scene is. Not always, but often. That's where you're slowing time down, where you're really bringing people into the moment with you. And then there's some sort of declining action and then the resolution, and usually this is the shortest part of the story because you want to spend most of your time raising the stakes and getting to that climax and then just kind of letting people down easy. But like I said, this isn't, many Moth-style stories do not follow this. Sometimes they drop us right into the moment, into the scene. Sometimes we're in one moment of time and then we look backwards or things like that. But this can kind of, if you're struggling with a story, thinking about how it might relate to this story map can be a good way to kind of organize your thoughts. So now we're going to listen to an example story. This is from a story slam, I believe in Boston. And I will say, excuse me, it does use the F word, and it does include mature topics. So if any young people or sensitive listeners want to step outside, it'll be about 5 minutes of a story. But while we listen to this story, I would love for you to think about the big three, change, stakes, and scene, and how it may or may not relate to the story map. And then after we watch that, we'll talk about it. And I'll give you just a minute to get the young people out. Thank you for your patience with this. It's hard to find one that doesn't include some kind of adult theme. Stella, you can stay. You're fine. While we're waiting, I will plug the workshop after this is making a fabric flower, kind of quilting. It'll be really fun, so feel free to stick around. And next week is our last week of I Can't workshops for this spring. We're going to do watercolor with the Sherwin-Miller Museum of Art and West African dance with Living Arts. Okay, so let's listen to this.
So it's one of those first dates where you catch yourself getting way too excited because things are going way too well. Supposed to be just drinks, that turned into dinner, more drinks. And then we were back at his place in Inwood in New York City, and we're just talking. And as it often does on first dates, the conversation snaked around to our previous experiences on the app that we had met on. And he starts laughing and says, oh man, the last girl that I met on there, she seemed great. But then we went back to her house, and get this, she was bald. Like, something about her immune system, I don't know, she had a wig, and she took it off in front of me. Like, how crazy is that? I was so weirded out. And what this man did not know is that he was sitting across from someone who had the exact same condition, the odds of which I cannot even begin to imagine. My immune system attacked every hair follicle on my body when I was 3 years old, and then again when I was 8, and then again when I was 14. And I'd been wearing wigs since high school, but it was something very few people knew because I kept it locked, quarantined, behind this thick door inside of me. And at that moment, it felt like I was floating above us, looking down at this conversation. And I thought about telling him. I thought about the bravery of the woman before me, and I thought about how stupid he was gonna feel if I did it. But I'm embarrassed to tell you, I chickened out. I said, you know what, it's late, I have to work tomorrow, grabbed my stuff and left. And I just sobbed that whole subway ride home. Because not 6 months before, I had finally escaped this horribly abusive relationship, and I had gone into therapy to figure out, how did I get into this relationship? how is it that I stayed for so long? And we'd figured out that it was because I had let that man in that space, right? And I had let him see me at my most exposed, my most vulnerable, and what I thought was my most ugly. And he had loved me anyway. And he had turned that love against me. He would do things like snatch my hair off during fights, because he knew that it would just break me. And I left that relationship with these two very deep fears, right? The first was that if anyone ever got into that space again, they would hurt me. And the second was that no one would ever love me for who I really am anyway. And that night on the train, I was like, this is proof. What just happened to me is proof that I'm right. And I resolved to make this my deepest, darkest secret. And when he emailed me the next day and asked to see me again, I said no. And I went on to date several people. I would date people for months, and they would never know, because I got really good at redirecting hands. And I got really good at sneaking out of beds to fix my eyebrows or my eyelashes while they were asleep. And I would ruin $3,000 wigs by sleeping in them night after night after night, because I felt so ugly without them. And if anyone ever found out, I would just bounce before they got a chance to leave me. And then last month, you guys, Ayanna Presley. Yeah. The congresswoman whose district we're in right now, she did something so incredible. She posted a video where she revealed that she'd been wearing wigs because of the same condition. And it was so brave, and it was so beautiful. And the next night, I sat across from this man I had been dating less than a month. And the street lamp was coming through the blinds, and the room glowed this beautiful bluish purple. And I took everything off, and I asked him to see me, like all of me, the real me. And I knew that it was for me, and that it was something I needed to do no matter how he responded. And he kissed my head, and he told me I was beautiful. And this time, I believed it. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, would you let them know they can come back in? That's quite a story, right? So let's go back to, and here's where I would love to get a little discussion going, and I will, like I said, need to repeat things into the mic. But so what would you say, or first of all, let's just hear some reactions to the story. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, do stories typically have a lesson or some kind of moral for people to take away? No, they certainly don't need to. A lot of times there will be some kind, like in this one, you might say the theme could be something along the lines of bravery or showing your true self or something, but not at all. No, you don't feel like you have to, you shouldn't feel like you have to teach or give people some kind of a lesson. It's really more focused on you, your point of view, and how you changed over the course of a story. And sometimes it can be like the time I really screwed up, or the time that, I surprised myself, or just there's so many different ways to approach a story, but that's a great question. Can anyone talk about what they saw as maybe the change? Yeah, those were two critical points, right? You're exactly right. And I might say that her experience with the date might have been around the and then one day moment, because that, and also you'll notice that we start out right in the scene with her, right? We start out in the scene on that first bad date. So it's a little bit different from the map because we're just dropped right into the action on that date. And that was kind of the incident that sort of changed everything for her. And then we start hearing these stakes, like the abusive ex-relationship, all the things she's doing to try to hide her condition. I mean, we really are feeling the stakes rising as she's talking about what happens between that bad date and then when she makes a decision to show her true self. And then the world as it now, it's pretty quick, right? She's like, hey, I had this And I would also say this one kind of has too many scenes. I feel like there's that first scene with the bad date, and then there's the second scene towards the end where she takes off her wig and has the meaningful experience. So it kind of just shows you there can be a lot of variation. I don't want to spend too much time because I want to jump into the activities. Anybody have any final thoughts they want to share? So this is a great question. Can this model, this Moth-style, be used outside of like storytelling events? Absolutely, and that's why I think it's so important. I can give you 2 examples just from my own life very quickly. One was I was asked to talk at a board meeting about my children's school, and I basically told a Moth-style story about why we chose that school that they ended up having me tell over and over again because they felt it really illustrated a point. And 2, a lot of times in talking about my work, I will, if not use this story map, use Moth-style techniques. And I think that as you get more comfortable and do more and more of this, you'll start finding ways that it empowers you to talk about your work or things you're passionate about or yourself. So yes, that's a great question, and that's part of why I think it's so important. It's not just about getting up at a mic at a story slam and telling a killer story. It's about how you use storytelling in your everyday life. So what we're going to do now is we are going to come up with some story ideas. So if you have no story idea, or if you already have a story idea in mind, that's awesome, but this may help you generate some more. So we mentioned about change being very important for Moth-style stories. And so these prompts are going to hopefully help you identify moments, times, events that brought about change. So you can think about these. I used to be, but now I. So if I was going to do this, I might say, I used to be painfully shy, but now I talk to strangers all the time. So that's one. And another one could be, everything changed for me when. One example I might use was, everything changed for me when I joined the band in 6th grade, or something like that. So we're going to take a few minutes to work on these, and then we'll do a couple more story prompts. Okay, feel free to keep working on those prompts. I'm going to put a few more up in case you're running dry or want some more. So have you ever surprised yourself? Learned a difficult lesson? Made a decision that changed everything? Been your own hero or someone else's? So feel free to take the next few minutes to jot down thoughts about these prompts. So would anybody like to share one of their I used to be but now I, or everything changed for me when? Does anybody want to share? Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
This proves my point even more, okay? I used to be shy with little self-confidence, but now I've never met a stranger. In 11th grade, I decided I did not want to stay this way and started pushing myself to change. The real change came for me when a year after college, I became a Mary Kay consultant.
Okay, yes, yeah, let's give her some applause. I like it. I used to be shy, but now I'm not. Very good. Everything changed for me when I finally spoke out after 7 years of exhaustion. Oh, I want to hear that story. Let's hear some more. Anybody else want to share a sentence or two? Yes, I'm sorry. Give her some applause. Yeah, let's hear yours. I used to be more concerned about what others thought about me. But now I don't much care. Yes. Love it. Yes. Let's hear a few more. Ooh, I got into a power struggle with Psycho Sadie. It wasn't another person, it was my dog. All right. Yes. He used to be a heart thief of women. That is a phrase, I like that. But everything changed when he had his daughter. Oh my gosh, you guys, we have so many good story ideas. All right, let me just check the time. So what we're going to do now is a little bit of choose your own adventure. So if you still don't feel like you have a story idea or you want to keep working on prompts and brainstorming, we are going to do a live web. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. However, if you already have a good story idea that you're interested in working on, you can start working on developing it. So you can make sure you know what the change is, you can work on your scene, you can identify stakes, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, we're getting really low on time, but we'll talk a little bit more about developing the first line and the last line of the story. That way you know exactly where you're gonna start and exactly where you're gonna end. And you may wanna also look at some key phrases or lily pads to help guide you through the story, because we're not gonna write it out. I really discourage you from writing out these stories, but some like bullet points to help guide you through is brilliant. So if you've already got a story idea, what you might want to take a picture of this slide and kind of work on this. If you want to work on more development, we're going to go back to this life web. So this is kind of for our visual thinkers. What we're going to do is you're going to start with a circle in the middle with your name. So my name is Anina, my circle's in the middle. And then what you're going to do, if you look up in the right, there it says important. So you're going to identify 3 to 5 really core things about yourself. It could be about your identity, about your background, about what's important to you, your hobbies. I mean, really just things that make you you. In my example, for one of mine, I chose being a mom. Being a mom is very important to me. So you're going to take a few minutes, a minute here, and identify a few things. If I was going to do more, I might do, I love to cook. It can be big things, little things, just stuff that's important to you. And then for each of those important things, you are going to pick, like if you look up where it says important, it says moment, event, memory. You're going to pick a few things related to that core part of you. It could be a moment. In my case, I identified leaving my ex-husband as a very important moment in my journey to become a mother. It might be a specific event or a memory. For an event for me, I put postpartum depression. I put the leap of faith that I took with my current husband, which, spoiler alert, it all worked out. I have beautiful children. But you're going to identify a few things, a few moments that maybe could be turned into a story or a scene. Because, for example, in my journey to become a mother, there's probably 100 stories I could tell, but I could tell one story just about the decision to leave my previous relationship, or just one story about the leap of faith with my husband. So we're looking for moments, events, memories related to those core ideas. For each of those moment, events, or memories, if there's one you really like that's sticking out to you, you may want to develop that a little bit more. Who was there? Where were you? What were you feeling? What were your 5 senses telling you at that time? And this can be another way to begin developing a story. So Life Web, and I'm sorry, we're just going to kind of have to crash forward here, but what we're going to do is if you're at a table with a lot of people, let's try to like even up the tables. So like maybe this middle table that has like 8, a couple of you could go over where there's 2. We're going to go for about 4 people per table because we only have a few minutes. What we're going to do is we are going to have 1 minute per person to tell the story of your name. So you could choose your first name, your middle name, your last name, or your nickname. But this is just to get you comfortable talking about yourself. So we're going to go around the table. Let's pretend this is 12 o'clock and we're just going to go clockwise. So if you're here, whoever's here is going to go first. We're going to have 1 minute. Let's go ahead and rearrange those tables because I want to make sure we have time for everybody to talk for 1 minute. So if you're a big table, go to a little table until there's about 4. And again, you're just going to talk freely about the story of your name, first, middle, or last, for 1 minute, and I'll let you know when the minutes are up. So, the first person at each table, do you know who you are? All right, yes, and let's go. Okay. I know, 1 minute goes by really fast. It's time for the next person, and ready, set, go. All right. We have another minute down. Thank you. So we're going to person number 3, and go. Time for the last person. Ready, set, go. Oh my gosh, does 1 minute go by fast or what? Hopefully that was a fun little way to talk about yourself, and learn about people at your table. We're gonna blow through these next slides really quick because we're out of time. Tips and tricks. Number 1, you want to tell your story from a scar, not a wound. So what I mean by that is sometimes things are too fresh and too painful to tell a story about. You may need some perspective. If you find yourself having trouble getting through talking about it, it's probably best to put that on the back burner and come back to that story at a later date. Be yourself. There are so many different ways that people might tell a Moth-style story. Maybe you speak Spanish and you're working some Spanish words in there. Maybe you're very shy and reserved and you speak in that voice. Maybe you're very extroverted and crazy. Just use your own voice and don't worry about how others do it. Consider being vulnerable. That makes a very powerful story. Consider the pacing. You might want to, when you're summarizing, kind of go through a little bit quicker, but then slow things down when you get to that main scene. We talked about first and last line, knowing exactly what verbatim your first line is going to be and your last line. That way you know exactly how you start and exactly how you're going to end up. And that can be really empowering. Again, talking about those key phrases or lily pads just to kind of help you get through the story. This is a great little trick. If you're telling a story and you realize, oh, I left out this important detail, you just say, I suppose I should mention, or, and did I tell you? And then you can get that in without derailing your story. Just a fun little phrase that can help. It's also really important as you develop a story to get ears on the story, to workshop it, whether that's your friend, your family member, or somebody in the storytelling community. Get people to listen to it because things that are evident to you may not be evident to them, and that can really help you. But always remember, it's your story and your choice of how to tell it. And then finally, remember that for this type of storytelling, the very, very last line is always thank you, and that's how we know you're done with the story. So what's next? You maybe had a great time today. You want to do more storytelling. So we have our next spring intensive with the Moth coming up in late March and early April. You should all have picked up a sheet with green and black. And this is, if you are interested in taking these workshops, first of all, we need you to commit to taking all 5 sessions. I should say it's free like everything else we do. If you can attend all 5 sessions and you would like to participate, fill out that sheet, check yes, I can attend, and turn it in as you leave. And we're just gonna draw a few, we have like 4 slots left, I think. We're gonna draw some random people and I will let you know next week. If you want to take a Moth workshop in the future, but you can't attend all of these, just check that box. I'm interested in the future, but I can't do this one. And again, fill it out and turn it in, and we'll get back to you. So we would love to have you join you for this. We have about 4 spots left. If this one doesn't work out, we do them at least twice a year. So we will keep you in mind for the future. And then definitely like the Center for Creativity on Facebook, because sometimes we'll have somebody drop out at the very last minute and we'll just post, hey, we just had a spot open up on Facebook. So make sure you've liked us there for a last minute opportunity. And then very important, there's a really vibrant storytelling organization in Tulsa called OK So Tulsa that I know some of you are active in. They do monthly slams. The next one is March 11th. They're at Living Arts. They're held at Living Arts. And the theme, and this is not something we've talked about, but story slams will have a theme. Like they want you to tell a story, in this case, based on the theme of confessions. This one's always a real salty one, so just keep that in mind. But they do slams about once a month, and I think usually they offer a workshopping session. That's actually something we started with them, but then we had to back off because we had too much to do, but they're still doing it. So there's a workshopping session on March 11th, OK So Tulsa.com. Definitely encourage you to get involved with them. So that is it. Don't forget to turn in those sheets if you're interested in future Moth workshops. I know this went by really fast. I hope you feel empowered and interested in doing more. Thank you so much. Feel free to stick around for the next workshop if you've registered. If not, there'll probably be spaces left. So we're going to turn the room over, and thank you so much.